we'll get going, and people will keep trickling in. So I'm Benjamin Walsh. I'm a sustainability specialist at Abley, and I'm going to demo our new commuting software, CarbonWise. So this is about showing you all the features, walking you through how the tool works, and there'll be ample space for questions throughout. So feel free to ask questions at any point, even if it's just out of technical curiosity. I'm happy to answer about any of the details and calculations behind the scenes and the emission factors and all of that. So, because I know some of you are interested in the nitty-gritty of carbon emissions and how we get to those results that you see here in the screenshot. We'll start with a bit of background information. So Abley is a technology and transportation consultancy. We do a whole range of traditional transport services, including transport planning and engineering, and we have a strong road safety focus. But we also have a technology side with lots of mapping capability, and we sell data products as well. Climate and sustainability is something that brings together our transport and technology expertise, so it's a very relevant space for us. We think we have a lot to contribute to this space, including the tool that I'm demoing today. So yeah, feel free to check out our website to see what else we do. Cool. So why did we build CarbonWise? First, a bit of background. So some of you may be familiar with the travel planning field. So that's a field of transport planning that supports organizations, employers, for example, but also developers to mitigate the impact of development and to promote alternative ways to get around. So that's not using the individual car, but using public transport or cycling or other modes. And so that's my background. That's what I did in the UK for a few years, and then I joined Abley. And we have clients in this space, but we thought this whole approach can be streamlined. It often involved doing employee travel surveys and then analyzing the data on how people travel on Excel. And this was all a very tedious process that was quite expensive for clients and not really time efficient. So we decided that this process could be streamlined or automated in most parts. And so that's what CarbonWise is trying to do. Essentially, it's to take this very inefficient process and take it to a point where we are integrating all the way from running a commuter survey or employee travel survey, all the way to delivering the insights to the business, to the organization. And so that's what I'm going to show. Okay, I'm going to switch screens. So one of the things to understand, and you see that in this screen. So one part is the dashboard, which you can see here. That's what the employer sees. That's where they see the results of the surveys we've done. And then there's the employee interface, which is where individual employees follow a link and go fill out the survey. It's like any other survey, except that it's within the CarbonWise platform, because we had some very specific requirements about how this needs to be built. So we built the whole thing in-house. Right. So I'm going to switch to the survey first. So this is the template version. So it's set for Abley just for demo purposes. So what we do with the client is we issue them with the survey link up there, and they would circulate it to their whole workforce. So they would circulate it via email, intranet, any other channel. They could even put QR codes with posters on posters in kitchen areas if people to encourage people to fill out the survey. And so an employee would go in, and there's just a security question to start. Employees need to indicate the name of the organization they fill this out for, and then they get into the survey. So we keep it quite short generally, and we have a feature that allows organizations to have a prize draw. This is to encourage respondents, of course, and there's information about privacy for respondents who want to find out a bit more. Okay, let's jump in. So the respondent is asked to provide their email address. This is to avoid duplicate answers in case the respondent forgot they already submitted, but it's also to be able to contact the respondent if they do win the prize. We need a way to contact that respondent for their employer to provide them with the prize. And then we'll need to know where the person lives, because that's needed to calculate commuting emissions, to calculate the distance of the commute, which is very important when you need to obtain emissions. So we've tested it on a number of organizations, and one of the issues is sometimes people are quite sensitive about sharing their home address, and so we've allowed for a whole range of options here. So I can go and enter a specific address, but I can also go and enter a landmark. So for example, I can say Auckland Museum, and if I live in the area, and I can just select that. Or I can enter a suburb, so I can say Manukau, for example, and just indicate that. Ideally, we'd like people to give their exact address because that's more precise and that gives better data, but we understand that some people are sensitive about it. And there's some explanations for the respondent to understand what they're expected to provide. If they are, however, really sensitive about that, they can decide to not provide an address at all. And in that case, we'll assume a default commuting distance, which can be configured at the beginning of the survey. Okay, so we'll keep going. This is the core of the survey where the respondent, it's like a travel diary. They'll tell us what they've done in the past week. So for the whole week, we need to know how they traveled to work and whether they worked from home, etc. So there's a lot of situations here that can be possible, especially with new ways of working. So if the person works part-time, for example, they may not have worked on Monday, so I'll take this one off, and that's a non-working day. If they worked from home on Tuesday, they'll be able to select that as a workplace. And later on, we can report on the number of days worked from home, which has become very important for organizations to report on that number. And then if they actually traveled somewhere, so I put an address or a suburb in Auckland, so we'll pick the Auckland office. And this list of workplaces will be configured to the client organization, so they'll be able to list all the workplaces, no matter how many of them there are in there. So every respondent will be able to select their workplace. And of course, because we do different days, a respondent can go to different workplaces on different days, so it's quite a flexible survey. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go, and I'll pick them up whenever I can. So let's say I travel to the Auckland office. Let's say I drove all the way on my own. I'm prompted to indicate the vehicle fuel type, which is very important to calculate emissions appropriately. So I have the range of choices of different fuel types, and we use Ministry for the Environment emission factors wherever available to calculate emissions. And let's say on the way back, I picked up my partner, so we carpooled with someone, and with the same car. Now let's do something a bit different on a Thursday. Let's say we took a train. So secondary mode would be if I took an e-scooter to the train station, for example. So it's the shorter leg of the journey, but I also want to record that. So then e-scooter would be the secondary mode, and we'll do the same. And so there's the whole range of options, including ferry, walk, cycle. So we cater for all sorts of trips. Okay, and there's a feature to copy answers to the next day. Some respondents will just do the same every day, so that's why we allow them to copy. saves them some time. So I've just copied from Thursday to Friday. And yeah, anything we can do to save the respondent a bit of time is always good. And no work on the weekend, and we can move on. Now here we have a section where we've just configured it with one question for Abley, because we like to keep surveys short, but there's the option for an unlimited number of questions for the employer to configure. So the way it works is when we set up the survey, we'll issue the client with a setup spreadsheet, which is just an Excel spreadsheet with rows and fields to fill out. And so the client can specify what questions they want to ask of their employees. So they can ask something very general. What can we do to help you with your commute? But they might also decide to ask respondents what initiative they would like to see. So you would give a multiple choice option of what initiative do you want the most? Do you want e-bike subsidies? Do you want better showers, carpooling scheme, etc. So the survey is also an occasion to test for those workplace initiatives. And yeah, I'll just this respondent wants more showers. Okay, and so this is the last question of the survey. So as you can see, it's pretty quick, pretty user friendly. And when I submit, the software is going to calculate my emissions based on the responses I just gave. So I'm going to get the commuting emissions for this respondent. So if you remember, I had some driving in there and some train and e-scooter combination. And the distance was fairly long because I had a respondent in Manukau working in the CBD in Auckland. So that car commute probably is having quite an impact here. And you can see that this respondent comes up to about 0.5 ton of CO2 equivalent per year commuting emissions. Now, we're not expecting people to know what carbon means, so we give them equivalents to that are relatable. We're planning on improving that page in the future with more equivalents or more information, potentially information on cost, for example, linking it to the cost of driving, which has risen quite a lot recently. And we can make this page more engaging in the future. Now, two more things on this page. Here, there's a link to general tips for respondents to have a look at to find out how they can reduce their emissions. So we're not just leaving them with that data without anything they can do. And transport initiatives. This is a link to the company's intranet, ideally. So if the client organization wants to promote, say, an e-bike subsidy scheme, we can put this link in there, and any respondent can go and find out more about this initiative. So it's also an occasion to engage your staff. Now, one last thing about this this page. The respondent is not logged in, so they can't access those results again. And this is to protect their privacy. We don't want someone else to come and see their results. So the only way they can reach back to those results is if they save it to PDF locally on their device. So that's just one of the safeguards we have in place, and also we don't want to annoy people with having to log in. Just let me check the questions. Okay, so can you enter more details to your on your trips? For example, how long the train ride is and how many kilometers we use the e-scooter for. So currently, it's a balance of level of detail, and that's required for reporting on emissions, and also keeping the user experience easy. So for now, what we do is we have a total distance of the trip that's calculated by the software. And the primary mode is 2/3 of the distance. It's assumed to be 2/3, and the secondary mode is 1/3. So it's a fairly arbitrary assumption that we've had to make to keep the interface simple. But of course, in the future, if we can find an interface that makes it work without making the survey too complicated for people to take, then we can look at being a bit more detailed on those aspects here. So, and there's a question from Saul about linking the this summary for an individual respondent to carbon offsets. So I suppose that would be about a respondent wanting to offset their emissions from here. So we haven't got this in place at this stage, but we are looking at ways to have CarbonWise contribute to the broader ecosystem of sustainability services. And so they can definitely do it manually and save their results and go and offset that amount in on the website of their choice to buy offsets. But I appreciate it's a fairly manual process. So potentially in the future we could have a link where people could go and offset their emissions. One thing to note, though, is that a lot of our clients will be offsetting emissions. So the organizations will be offsetting emissions already because they are trying to be carbon neutral. So the response emissions would be offset in that case by the organization. All right, so this was the survey part, and I'm going to move on to the dashboard to show you what the employer sees. And we're doing all right with time, but keep the questions coming in. I think it's good to address them as they come up. So what you're looking at is the results of the Abley survey we did back in December. So we're not a large organization, and the figures are pretty small. That's nothing a sustainability manager would be scared of. But that's again because we're pretty small, and also because we are pretty good with our commuting. So in a sense, this is the main page showing survey results, and it shows information on emissions and on the trips that have been recorded. So the outputs on the right are the sort of typical travel planning outputs you might expect. So it's breaking down the trips into modes, and that gives an idea of whether your workforce uses a lot of a single occupancy car for commuting, or whether they're quite sustainable. That's a nice overview. This one is about planning facilities. So we have a workplace filter up there. I was on all workplaces by default, but I can go drill down to the Christchurch office, for example, and I can see how the Christchurch staff commute. Now, this is interesting because it shows me on an average day, based on the sample we have, on an average day, we'd have about 14 people cycle in. That's useful because we can use that to inform how many cycle parking spaces we need to provide at the workplace. So typically you would provide not just the average, but slightly over, because you need to allow for peak days as well, where the weather is great and everyone's decided to cycle in. So that's information that the site manager, facilities manager can use to inform their provision of cycle parking. Or also that the same applies to electric bikes, if you need a charging point for them, or electric vehicle charging points for cars, if the company wants to provide that as well. So it gives an idea of demand for facilities planning. In terms of other measures that the company can do, they can use the commuting distance of employees to know how far people live from work. I'll just click back to all workplaces. And what this shows is that up to 10 kilometers, really considering e-bikes allow longer commutes, up to 10 kilometers, you can promote cycling. But if you have lots of people with rural commutes, then maybe another type of initiative is more appropriate to develop. So that output gives an indication of how to plan for these things and where to focus efforts. And same here, this is a breakdown of people's commuting emissions in a year. Shows that we're doing pretty well at Abley, but we may have a few long distance commuters here in the 2 tons of more or more. So maybe we might look at targeted support for these people to help them with their longer commutes, or maybe these people need to work remotely more often, for example. So these outputs allow you to target your initiatives. And finally, we've got the average emissions per employee in the year and total workforce emissions. So these are our commuting emissions for the year based on that survey. And we also have the number of days worked from home, which sustainability teams will want to use for reporting as well. So the Ministry for the Environment provides an emission factor for each day worked from home, so that you can report on commuting emissions and you can report on working from home emissions side by side in your greenhouse gas inventory. So I'll just click to the response tracker. So this page is quite simple. It's about when answers come in, and it's about how many answers do we have and what the sample size is. So this is a summary of the sample size. So we got a good response rate when we did our survey. Our people are quite engaged. For a larger organization, it gets harder to get a larger response rate, but in terms of absolute number, you'll get enough people. And the graph respondents over time here is quite important while you're running the survey, because that's what tells you when you need to chase. So for us, we got lots of responses on the first day, actually most of them, and then it just dropped right away. And we probably chased on the 5th, I assume, and then we got some more. So it's something that the internal comms team or sustainability manager can keep an eye out on to chase, basically remind managers to remind their teams, for example. So all the chasing strategies that are quite important to push the response rate up. Right, so, and there was one thing I haven't shown is the export format. Yep, so thanks for the question, Dan. So the export formats, we'll add some more, but for now we have the raw data. So that's basically row by row showing the survey answers, but without any personal information. And that's for record keeping, but also if the client wants to run their own analysis on the data, they can do that. And the summary data is what Dan will be interested in. So I'll just open this one. Okay, coming through. Okay. So this is the summary output that a sustainability team will want to use for their emissions reporting. So it has the activity data, the kilometers traveled by each mode or category, and we're looking at all workplaces here. So this is for all workplaces, and then there's a breakdown for each workplace, which is the data you can see on the dashboard. But it's in terms of activity data and emissions, which is what's used for reporting. And then we've also got the sample size here and the total days worked from home, again, because that's also used for reporting. And so that's something that will then feed into your carbon reporting software. So whether you use Toy2 Manage, BraveGen, whether you use Ecos, we're working with all these guys to make sure it's easy to then take that data and put it in their software. And so we're making sure we comply with mainly the Toy2 requirements, and we're working with Toy2 at the moment to get certification for our methodology and our outputs. And we document all our assumptions and the emission factors we use here, and bearing in mind that all of these can be adjusted at the beginning of the survey. So this can be specific to each survey if the organization has a specific criteria. For example, they want to adjust the bus emission factor because they mostly are in a city that has a very different emission factor for their buses. And so as to see the other outputs, okay, we'll open that one. We've got a few more minutes to go. Just bear with me. Yeah. Cool. So this is basically not great to look at. It's just a raw output. But what you can see is that there's a code for each survey submission and each respondent. So they all have a unique they will have a unique ID per response and per trip. And then we calculate the distance per trip, and we adjust that in some cases where it's wrong. And we produce the CO2 equivalent emissions for each trip. Of course, if it's a non-working day, then there's no emissions, and if it's working from home, it's zero. And in there, we'll have the workplace for each trip, but we'll also have the main workplace of a respondent, which is listed here. So so this gives the breakdown, and you can use that again for record keeping, but also if you want to do a bit of further reporting on your end, you can use that as well. Yeah, so these are the outputs we use, and we're planning on adding more outputs. So one of them will be exporting the dashboard outputs, so those cards, exporting them into a nicely formatted PowerPoint format, just for internal reporting, or if you want to feed back the information to your organization, then it'll be easier than taking screenshots. But we're still working through those improvements. We have quite a big pipeline of features to implement into the software, and it's something we do on an ongoing basis. So Mel's just popped in a link. If anyone wants to chat to me, feel free to just book a meeting via this link, or just send me an email, and I'll be delighted to give you an answer. Cool. Awesome. We're just 1 minute before, and I think we'll leave it here. Thanks, Dan. I'm glad you like the interface. Awesome. See you, everyone.